Yashodanandana Brata Janarajana Yashodanandana Brata Janarajana Amunatira Manatari Yamunatira Manatari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Gopi Dhanadhalabha Girivanajari Jaya Gopi Dhanadhalabha Girivanajari Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Bhavaraja Gacharya Shnatitrapta Sri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Bhavaraja Gacharya Shnatitrapta Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Hari Bol, devotees. So we are reading from 5th canto, chapter 8, verse 18. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Verse 18. Api cha na vrikaha salavriko nyatmano va naika chara eka charo va pakshayati. Word for word translation. Api cha, or na, not, vrikaha, a wolf, salavrikaha, a dog, anyat, anyatmaha, any one of them, any one of many, va, or, na eka charaha, the hogs that flock together, eka charaha, the tiger that wanders alone, va, or, pakshayati is eating, and in parentheses it says, it is eating the poor creature. I'm guessing referring to the deer. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. I do not know, but the deer might have been eaten by a wolf or a dog, or by the boars that flock together, or the tiger who travels alone. Purport. Tigers never wander in the forest in flocks. Each tiger wanders alone, but forest boars keep together. Similarly, hogs, wolves, and dogs also do the same. Thus Maharaj Bharat thought that the deer had been killed by some of the many ferocious animals within the forest. Translation again. I do not know, but the deer might have been eaten by a wolf or a dog, or by the boars that flock together, or the tiger who travels alone. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmanitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Again, Hare Bol devotees. So this verse is quite short. The purport is short. Nonetheless, I found it quite intriguing, and I had an interesting thought process that came from it. So I'll just share with you the thought process that came about, and then get to the main topic that I got out of this verse, which is personalism. So I was thinking to myself, it's interesting that so much emphasis is put on the fact that Maharaj Bharat is thinking, was the deer eaten by a dog or a hog that travel in flocks, travel in groups, or a tiger who wanders alone? And one could think that this is just poetry, or one could think that it's a poetic explanation of the natural world, which both are true in one sense. However, sadhus never speak frivolously. There's always deep meaning that one can derive from anything that a sadhu says, what to speak of all the saintly persons within the Bhagavatam. And so thinking about this, Prabhupada, there's a short purport, but even in the purport, Prabhupada reiterates the fact of tigers, they wander alone, whereas boars and dogs and wolves, they travel in packs. And I was thinking to myself, what is the point of mentioning these facts? These are just biological facts that don't seem very important, but one could think deeply about it and get some insight. And so I was thinking about how human beings, because after all, I am talking to living entities, I'm talking to fellow jivas who are in human bodies, because that's how we practice Krishna consciousness. Boars can't do that, tigers can't do that. And as human beings, generally speaking, we are social creatures. And if you speak to scientists who are heavily entrenched within the dogma of the theory of evolution, they'll tell you that Dacia has his hand up. Sorry, Dacia, can everybody hear me? Is there anything?
Sorry, that was a pocket put up hand. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, I was saying that the scientists who are heavily entrenched in the dogma of the theory of evolution will tell you that humans couldn't exist if they didn't act socially, because that's how the theory of evolution dictates. And in one sense, it's true. Human beings do fare better when they have a community to support them. However, not all human beings act that way. Not all human beings need that as a necessity. Generally speaking, it's true, but there are always outliers in any statistical model. And Prabhupada mentions that the tiger wanders alone. So tigers are raised and then they wander off on their own. They hunt on their own. They live on their own. Whereas dogs and wolves do the exact opposite. And hogs, they live in communities. And so you see this diversity also within human society. And you also see this with amongst spiritual human beings. And I was thinking about Srila Prabhupada's example. When Srila Prabhupada was in India and he was trying to preach Krishna consciousness, he tried to be very social. He tried to create a society within India. And he asked help from so many fellow Indian-bodied persons, and practically nobody gave him any help. He even started the League of Devotees in Jhansi, and it started to expand, and then it just collapsed. And so Prabhupada made this effort to create a society to be supported by a community, by his godbrothers, who didn't give him any support in terms of reaching out and preaching. So Prabhupada attempted to be social in that way, but in the end, he traveled alone to America by himself, practically very, very little help from anybody. And then when he was in the US for at least a year or so, he also traveled alone. And so you can see this diversity, how yes, human beings fare better, generally speaking, when they have community to back them up, but it's also not 100% necessary. And you see this diversity amongst spiritual human beings, very special souls. And so Prabhupada was alone for a while, and then ISKCON was created, and all prospective devotees and new devotees were coming to him, and all of a sudden you have ISKCON, you have this gigantic society. You also see this variety of social versus isolated amongst our acharyas. We see that Jagannath Das Babaji and Gaurkishore Das Babaji, they practice Nirjan Bhajan. They practice their bhajan in isolation for the most part. not so much emphasis on preaching and being social. Whereas you have the opposite. There's a term for it that I can't remember, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur did the exact opposite. They were very social. They propagated the preaching of Krishna consciousness in a social manner. You even see this diversity of social versus isolated within pastimes in Vrindavan. You see social Nara Leela, social human-like Leela community in Vrindavan. You have the cowherd men and women. You have Krishna's family. They all act together socially. However, you also see Babaji's. Lord Shiva sometimes acts as a Babaji in Vrindavan to play out pastimes. He comes to Mother Yashoda and begs to have darshan of baby Krishna. So even within the spiritual world, you see this diversity amongst social versus more isolated. And really, this boils down to personalism, because each one of us is a person, and that personalism, inevitably, it entails a variety, because not every individual is the same. And because every individual is not the same, they're going to act differently amongst themselves eternally. So we should understand and embrace the fact that devotees, including ourselves, are individual persons, and thus we have some variety between us, variety in how we speak and act, and variety how in the way we like to serve also. Even when we reach the highest levels of Krishna consciousness, we will have unique services that we are attracted to. And even now, we have similar attractions to certain services. So we talk about personalism. Well, actually, in my experience, we talk about impersonalism much more than personalism. We talk about the negative aspect of it. In Prabhupada's pranam prayers, there's emphasis on his coming to the West to destroy impersonalism, because impersonalism is the default setting of the material world. And so it's very easy for us to act that way, think that way, speak that way. So it actually takes us a conscious effort to remind ourselves that I'm a person, and so are my fellow devotees, and so is Krishna. So are the acharyas. They're all individual persons. And so being reminded of this is very helpful. I find it very helpful because I forget all the time. And of course, my ability to act more personally has increased as the years have gone on in practicing Krishna consciousness, but that default setting is always there. So even though we make progress, it's very easy to fall into acting impersonally with others and with your own self, being honest or dishonest with yourself. So ultimately, we want to cultivate this personalism, because we're all practicing bhakti, and bhakti is love of God, or cultivation of love of God, who is a person. This point about personal and impersonal reminds me of a book. So acting impersonally causes such great trouble amongst devotees in our practice of Krishna consciousness. And even on a material level, this impersonalism is acknowledged as being a huge problem. There's a book called The Primary Wound. It's written by psychologists, and their theory is that most of psychological issues that we see in humans today, if you boil them down to their essence, it really comes down to impersonalism. From a very young age, we were treated as objects instead of persons. And this wreaks havoc on our are growing up and are cultivating human good qualities, it just wreaks havoc. We're treated as economic units that work hard to accumulate money and then use that money to purchase products and consume products and emit carbon. That's it. And this impersonal way of looking at each other and looking at ourselves is completely unnatural, because the spirit soul is a person. And so naturally, if you follow this logic, if you're acting in a way which is not natural, which is not conducive to being a spirit soul, it's going to cause all sorts of havoc, inevitably pain, suffering, madness, all that stuff. So anyway, cultivating this personalism is very important for us. So I had time to prepare the class as I normally like to, so I'll read some verses from the Bhagavatam that reiterate and expand on this point about personalism. So I'll read first from a verse from the second canto. This verse, it's actually the purport to the verse, where Prabhupada emphasizes that each jiva, each living entity, is a spirit soul and who has consciousness, and this consciousness is the natural effect of an individual person. That each jiva is a person, including Krishna, who is also, he's the supreme person, but he's also a person nonetheless. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, 9th chapter, verse 38, and the purport, Prabhupada says, in this verse, it is clearly mentioned that the Lord is Ajanaha, or the supreme person, and that he was showing his transcendental form, Atmana Rupam, to Brahmaji, while instructing him in the summarization of Srimad Bhagavatam in 4 verses. He, or Krishna, is Ajana, or the supreme person, amongst Jananam, or all persons. So he's saying Krishna is a person amongst all the other countless persons, all the other countless jivas. All living entities are individual persons, and amongst all such persons, Lord Hari is the supreme, as confirmed in the Shruti mantra, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. So there is no place for impersonal features in the transcendental world, as there are impersonal features in the material world. So simply by this one sentence, we can follow this logic that if we really want to go to the spiritual world, to the transcendental world, we have to cultivate personalism. We have to root out impersonalism, because there is no impersonalism in the spiritual world. It's purely personal. Continuing, he says, whenever there is chaitana, or knowledge, the personal feature comes in. And so this word chaitana also, Prabhupada translates it also as consciousness. Frequently in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he translates this word chaitana as consciousness. So I'll read the rest of the purport in this light as chaitana being consciousness. So in the spiritual world, everything is full of consciousness, or you could also say self-awareness. Consciousness is also self-awareness. So in the spiritual world, everything is full of consciousness or self-awareness. And therefore, everything in the transcendental world, the land, the water, the tree, the mountain, the river, the man, the animal, the bird, everything is of the same quality, namely consciousness or self-awareness. And therefore, everything there is individual and personal. So every object, every animal, every tree, the rivers, everything is personal. Yamuna Devi personifies herself, right? Bhakti Devi is a person. She personifies herself, etc., etc. Srimad Bhagavatam gives us this information as the supreme Vedic literature, and it was personally instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to Brahmaji, so that the leader of the living entities might broadcast the message to all in the universe in order to teach the supreme knowledge of Bhakti Yoga. Brahmaji, in his turn, instructed Narada, his beloved son, the same message of Srimad Bhagavatam, and Narada, in his turn, taught the same to Vyasadeva, who again taught it to Shukadeva Goswami. Through Shukadeva Goswami's grace and by the mercy of Maharaj Parikshit, we are all given Srimad Bhagavatam perpetually to learn the science of the absolute personality Godhead, Lord Krishna. So at the end of this, end of this purport, Prabhupada's mentioning the persons. We are reading Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by Brahmaji to Narada, from Narada to Vyasadeva, from Vyasadeva to Shukadeva Goswami, and he's mentioning their names. This, whenever there is a name, there implies a person behind the name. So this is very scientific. It's very these are the facts that real spiritual science is personalism. Whereas impersonal spiritual matters, even if they're correct, they're extremely limited on what is actually there, because the Brahman effulgence is the light that emanates from Krishna, the spiritual light that emanates from Krishna. However, it comes from a person. So personalism is how we can cultivate bhakti yoga, if that's what we desire. So I'll share another verse from the 8th canto. This is a prayer by Swayambhuva Manu that stresses the point of personalism. This is 8th canto, 1st chapter, verse 16. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, works just like an ordinary human being, yet he does not desire to enjoy the fruits of work. He is full in knowledge, free from material desires and diversions, and completely independent. As the supreme teacher of human society, he teaches his own way of activities, and thus he inaugurates the real path of religion. I request everyone to follow him. This prayer is really nice. Swayambhuva Manu's stressing the point. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is a person, he has a name. His name is Krishna. And sometimes he descends and he works and he acts like an ordinary human being. However, he's not an ordinary human being. He's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is not easy for us to understand. He doesn't desire the fruits of his work. He is completely omniscient. He is free from material desires and any faults, even though we are full of faults and we are not omniscient. He's completely independent. He's a person like you and I. However, he has all this power. He's not independent. He's not dependent on anybody or anything. He can do whatever he wants. And as the supreme teacher of human society, he's the most qualified teacher of all of us. He shows us his own way of doing things, his own way of activities, and he's worthy of following and listening because he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thus, he inaugurates the real path of religion. He gives the real path of religion because he is the supreme authority. And Swayambhuva Manu says, to conclude, I request everyone to follow him. In other words, he's my Lord, he is my master, he's the greatest. I could tell you so much more about how wonderful he is. Please just follow him. He will help you, he loves you, and he's full of mercy. So this is Swayambhuva Manu's personal prayer, personal begging the other jivas like us to listen to Krishna. In the purport to this verse, Prabhupada says, this is the sum and substance of our Krishna consciousness movement. We are simply requesting human society to follow in the footsteps of the teacher of Bhagavad Gita. In other words, Krishna. Krishna is a person. Please follow his instructions. Follow the instructions of Bhagavad Gita as it is, and your life will be successful. That is the summary of the Krishna consciousness movement. The organizer of the Krishna consciousness movement is teaching everyone how to follow Lord Ramachandra, how to follow Lord Krishna, how to follow Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Prabhupada's pointing out that this is the essence of what I'm trying to teach you, what Krishna is trying to teach you. Prabhupada saying, I'm just repeating what Krishna says. Krishna is a person, he's giving instructions. He's the supreme person. He knows how to help us. He knows how to love us. He knows how to get us out of this mess. Just please listen to him. So I'll read one more part of the purport. Prabhupada says, Swayambhuva Manu is the leader of mankind, and he has given a book called Manu Samhita to guide human society. Herein, he directs us to follow the Supreme Person at Godhead in his different incarnations. So this is such a nice personal prayer. You can actually feel Swayambhuva Manu's imploring us, begging us. Krishna is worth it. He's a person, although he doesn't act like we do. He doesn't look like we do. I promise you, he's a person, and I'm begging you, just listen to him. Please listen to him. And Manu, of course, is the leader of mankind. Why he is and how he is, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but we can see that if we understand who is worth listening to, they will say, just listen to Krishna. And of course, it's a long line, it's a long list of hierarchy, but ultimately they're all saying, Krishna is a person, just listen to him, please. Okay. So another point about personalism that I'll share from the Bhagavatam. So we could ask ourselves or ask each other, why can't I see Krishna? Or why can't I interact with him in person? Or maybe I'm not qualified. Why can't I interact with his associates? Why can't I see the acharyas? Why can't they come and speak to me? Why can't I have, if they're persons, why can't I have a personal interaction with them? We're stressing this point of personalism. I want to meet them, right? I want to talk to them. But because we are persons and cultivating Krishna consciousness is also personally cultivating personalism, we have to understand that persons sometimes like privacy. Because we're persons, sometimes we like to have privacy and boundaries around ourselves, or boundaries between us and persons or situations that we simply don't desire to interact with for one reason or another. This is also part of personalism. And so this is a little bit hard to chew, but maybe they don't want to speak to us right now, or maybe they do want to share with us or speak to us, but indirectly. And of course, that takes some humility on our part to accept that. But this point is stressed in the ninth canto. I can't remember the full context of the pastime, but it involves Maharaj Nimi, and in a purport to ninth canto, 13th chapter, verse 11, Prabhupada says, the Supreme Person of Godhead can be seen or unseen according to his own transcendental desire. Similarly, a devotee, being Jivan Mukta, can be seen or not as he chooses. Jivan Mukta is liberated Jiva. And Prabhupada's pointing out that similarly to Krishna, Krishna has the right to be seen or unseen. So do the liberated souls, because they're persons, they have this choice. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Naham Prakashaha Sarvasya Yoga Maya Samavritaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is not manifest to everyone and anyone. To the common man, he is unseen. Ataha Shri Krishna Namari Na Bhavid Grayam Indriyai. Krishna and his name, fame, qualities, and paraphernalia cannot be materially understood. Unless one is advanced in spiritual life, sevan mukhi hi jivada, one cannot see Krishna. Therefore, the ability to see Krishna depends on Krishna's mercy. The same privilege of being seen or unseen according to one's own desire was given to Maharaj Nimi. Thus he lived in his original spiritual body as an associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada's pointing out Krishna is a person, he has the right to choose whether to be seen or unseen. And similarly, his liberated devotees, his confidential servants, they also have this right to be seen or unseen according to their desire. And you can see this also even within the material realm. Of course, it's much more difficult for us to achieve this, but we have it here too. I can't just demand I see Joe Biden and he'll just appear. You know, who am I? He's currently the president of the United States. I have practically no right and no power to demand that he stand before me and prove to me that he's the president of the United States, or to give me this or give me that. It's not going to happen. And so this persons, jivas, individual persons, they have this right of being seen or unseen, to interact or not interact. Of course, when we're in the material world, it's not as easy. Some might have the desire to be unseen, and there's nothing they can do about it. Or there's some have the desire to be seen and heard, and nobody will listen. So it's a little bit more difficult for us in the material world, but that same essence is there. Because we are individual persons, we have these tendencies, we have these desires, we have this minute independence to choose one way or another. And so we can see through these examples, through this science of Krishna consciousness, that ultimately we're persons. And so to treat each other that way and to treat ourselves that way is extremely important. If we have the desire, the intense desire to cultivate bhakti or love of God, we have to understand the likes and dislikes of Krishna, who is a person, the likes and dislikes of his devotees, how to interact with each other in a personal way, and to honor that individualism, that some devotees simply won't act as you do. They won't think the way you do. Sometimes they won't speak the way you do. They won't desire the way you do, or the way you might expect them to or want them to. And that's their right as a jiva. Of course, when it comes to preaching and cultivating bhakti in a community, things, what I said, can get a little complicated. But that's another discussion. But essentially, we should honor each other's individuality. So there's one thing that I'll end with. However, I didn't properly prepare for it. The end, I was thinking of a point that, we can have a tough time with personalism, because accepting personalism in its essence means that there's always somebody less than me, there's always somebody below me, and there's always somebody above me. There's always somebody way better at everything than I am, and Krishna being that ultimately the ultimate person in that sense. And so that's very difficult for the false ego to to comprehend and accept. But I was thinking of an incentive to become a devotee and to practice Krishna consciousness, because those who become confidential associates of Krishna share in the immense power that Krishna has, but to speak of the love that he gives and receives from his devotees. So this is from the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the third volume, 6th chapter, starting at verse 202. Who is this? This is Gopakumar is explaining to the Mathura Brahmana. He's explaining his experience in Goloka Vrindavan. He says, just as the demigods who have entered the material creation are counterparts of the Lord's Vaikuntha associates, those eternal associates Vaikuntha are incarnations of the Goloka devotees. Yet the demigods themselves, those very devotees, appear on earth now and again for the pleasure of Lord Vishnu, when he wants to enjoy various pastimes. So this verse and a couple other following verses is stressing the point that the closest confidential devotees of Krishna have immense power, like Krishna does, because Krishna wants his devotees to be with him, and so they expand themselves in numerous forms in Vaikuntha and in the material world. In verse 204 it says, and just as the incarnations of Krishna, the source of all incarnations, are non-different from him, the incarnations of the Goloka Vasis, the residents of Goloka, are non-different from them. So Krishna brings his devotees with him, and they expand themselves. They could be in Goloka, they can be in Vaikuntha, they can be in the material world. And so this immense power, this immense opulence could and should be intriguing to us. What to speak of the love that Krishna feels for his devotees and his devotees feel for Krishna in so many amazing interactions. That should be our highest desire. But nonetheless, acting personally can be a bit challenging for us, but there's so much incentive. There's so much to gain. There's so many wonderful things that are attractive that we can gain from acting acting personally and cultivating this personalism in Krishna consciousness, in cultivating bhakti. So I'm currently reading this part of the Brihad Bhagavatam. That's why I brought it up, because I thought it was relevant to this point. But that's all I have to share. If any devotees have any comments, questions, or corrections, please share. Goshtananda, yes. Thank
All
you,
right.
Rashidi.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Haribo Tarika.
I would like to thank you for another nice class. I very much appreciate the manner in which you prepare your classes. Well prepared, and so the presentation is very nice, very complete. It's really satisfying to hear. You have covered all of the salient points of this particular topic, so I have nothing to add other than my appreciation. Although one thought occurs to me, speaking about being alone, that Srila Prabhupada in his early preaching endeavors coming to the West was alone. Srila Prabhupada described his own, this particular experience from his own perspective. He said that I never felt that I was alone. I always had the association of my spiritual master. It's in Shastra, the advice is often given that one should never think oneself alone, but that he is always accompanied by Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead within the heart. And similarly, the spiritual master is always with the sincere disciple. But as you say, we are generally social animals. Some of us have a tendency to be more independent. And sometimes it's not necessarily a sort of independence, but actually a kind of impersonalism, which is a problem for us. Because, as you say, in our rightful position, our constitutional position, we are always in the association of persons. Everything is a person in the spiritual world, absolutely everything. And so life, spiritual life is all about personal relationships. And if we are averse to personal interactions, that's going to be a problem. Part of the process of cultivating Krishna consciousness is cultivating the ability to interact with others effectively, respectfully, and properly there. And so that it's a part of the standard training for a Vaishnava. Any Vaishnava takes direction from a bona fide spiritual master. He is taught to remain always humble and respectful of everyone. That's fundamental to proper personal interactions. At least we don't want to offend others. So we have to practice being respectful, and that depends upon maintaining a humble attitude. Then it will be easy to be properly respectful of others. Srila Prabhupada used to instruct us very regularly that we should be respectful towards all living entities, not just human beings that we think are, for one reason or another, entitled to some respect. Every human being should be respected regardless of their status, and not just the human beings, but all living entities should be respected. If we can't understand why we should be respectful of all living entities, at least we should understand that they are all part and parcel of Krishna, and at least we should respect them for that fact, that they are a fragmental portion of Krishna himself. So certainly they are entitled to respect. And then, there was a time in ISKCON when I've spoken about this before, the fact that we were all trained to offer our respectful obeisances to one another. And sometimes even non-devotees, Srila Prabhupada instructed that we should offer our obeisances to our parents, whom, in many cases would be non-devotees. But he explained that, they are still due that respect from us. He even instructed that we should offer our obeisances to Mayavadi sannyasis. Simply because they are sannyasis, we should offer them that respect, even if they're Mayavadis. But, so amongst the devotees, we used to always offer our obeisances at least once a day. The first time we would see a particular individual, we would offer our obeisances to one another. Some of our temples, there were many devotees, so it was a big job. I grew up in the New York temple, and there were maybe a couple of hundred devotees at the time. And we all had a little callus in the middle of the top of our forehead from always, offering our obeisances on the floor. But what was it that I wanted to say? God, my mind is so useless these days. Old age is no fun. Everything starts to malfunction, and the cognitive functions degenerate. So personalism is extremely important. It's extremely important. If we don't cultivate the ability to properly and effectively interact with others on a personal level, our progress in spiritual life will be impeded. Our growth will be stunted because we will commit offenses, and offenses are a very serious stumbling block. So we have to become somehow offenseless. So it's an essential aspect of the cultivation of Krishna consciousness, learning how to respect all others and treat them properly. For myself, I find that really challenging. I don't know, I guess in some regards, I had an unfortunate history, and early in my life, I was subject to a tremendous amount of abuse, very badly treated by others, which, I understand to be my karma, but at the time, as a very young person, it was extremely traumatizing. And I learned to actually, I just disliked human beings. I found animals to be much more predictable, reliable, and better people. I enjoyed living in forests and just being with trees, plants, and animals. And I honestly, I really disliked human beings. I found them to be horrible people. And certainly that's often true. There are terrible injustices perpetrated by human beings against others. They can be terrible towards one another and towards other species. But I learned to be very independent and aloof and generally antisocial. So through the course of my devotional life, I've had to grapple with this conditioning and open myself to personal relationships, and pretty much reprogram myself and learn how to be more personal. It has not come easily for me, because as I say, the conditioning was very powerful. It's just my unfortunate karma, but others may have a very different experience. I marvel at some of the people around me who are very, very personal, and personal interactions seem to come effortlessly for them. And I observe also that different people have different degrees of dependency on socialization. Some people are very happy and satisfied to be relatively independent, while others seem to need a lot of support or interaction with others. But regardless, everyone has to learn how to be person and their dealings. So I very much appreciate your class. I thank you for taking the time to do such thorough preparation. And I appreciate the methodical and well-organized manner in which you make your presentations. It's I think I have a kind of a mechanical way of thinking, and your presentations suit my mentality very, very. Things are organized in a logical fashion that works well for me. So some of my appreciations. Thank you, Prabhu. It's 8 o'clock. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. I appreciate your sharing your personal experience. I really like that because I also relate to what you were sharing. My experiences in this lifetime made me kind of naturally aloof to most people in society, and I do fairly well being alone. However, that tendency of impersonalism was always there for me. So I've had to learn to balance the two and become personal, yet also understand my nature is more independent anyway. So learning to balance that out. So I really appreciate your sharing your experience. I like your point about Prabhupada was never actually alone. He never actually felt that he was alone. So even if we find ourselves in situations where we're apparently alone, if we cultivate Krishna consciousness to that level, the fact is we'll never actually feel that way. We'll never actually experience that loneliness. So that's nice. There was one other point that I was gonna make that you shared. Yeah, everybody has their different natures. Some are much more social than others. For those who are more independent, they can embrace that. However, they also have to be mindful that the default setting is impersonalism, which can be tricky. So yeah, it's not so black and white. There has to be a lot of balance and also self-awareness. Super helpful to understand what is my nature, what is the nature of others, how do I balance all of these differences to advance in Krishna consciousness, to cultivate this personalism. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. If there's anything else that anybody would like to share, please share. Otherwise, we will end here. Okay. Thank you, dear devotees, for attending. Thank you for your association. Thank you for giving me a chance to share. Hare Krishna.